Her daughter-in-law called her extended family, right there in church, in front of everyone. Loretta Mae Dixon, 71, homeowner, widow, and Micah's mother, didn't blink. Danielle, married in but never fully rooted, smiled and moved on like nothing happened. By Monday, the notice was served, the locks were changed, and the guest room she'd claimed was legally revoked. Loretta had fed them, sheltered them, and held her tongue for 4 years. Now, the documents would hold the line. Because when your own son's wife forgets who built the house, the mother stops leaving the door open. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The organ's last notes hung in the air like perfume, sweet, lingering, and just a touch too long. Loretta Mae Dixon smoothed her skirt and waited for the final amen to fade. Sunlight cut through the stained glass windows in threads of gold and ruby, painting the congregation in Sunday bests and bright chatter. The service was over, but the mingling had just begun. By the pulpit, people were lining up for photos with the new pastor's wife, a woman with a soft Carolina drawl and a camera-ready smile. Loretta stood a few steps behind her daughter-in-law, Danielle, watching the scene unfold like a slow, polished performance. Danielle loved a crowd. Her dress sparkled faintly under the church lights, and her laugh carried like a bell through the fellowship hall. She had one hand on Micah's arm, nails perfect and pink, the other resting gently on Emma's shoulder. When the pastor's wife turned their way, Danielle's smile brightened another notch. "This is my husband Micah," she began, voice syrup-sweet. "Our daughter Emma." She paused, just long enough to let her gaze drift toward Loretta, who was holding her purse and a small tin of lemon drops. "And that's his extended family." The word landed soft, like velvet over stone. But the room seemed to tilt with it, extended. Loretta blinked once, then again. The hum of small talk around her dimmed. She could still hear the faint buzz of the ceiling fans and the rustle of programs being folded, but her own heartbeat felt louder. Beside her, Miss Pearl Bennett, sharp-eyed, steady as a pew anchor, turned her head slow, lips parting just a little. "Extended family?" Pearl mouthed the words, brows rising high. Danielle had already turned away, arms sliding tighter around Micah, leading him toward another group of church ladies. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks on tile. Loretta stayed rooted to her spot. Her fingers brushed the hymn book still clutched under her arm. The same book she'd used every Sunday for 20 years. Pages worn soft where she'd underlined verses about grace, patience, humility. Grace, patience, humility. She swallowed each word like something that might choke her. Emma glanced back, quick, uncertain. Their eyes met, the child's gaze round and questioning, as if asking if Grandma had heard it right. Loretta offered the faintest smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "Well," Pearl murmured under her breath, sidling closer, "that girl sure put her foot in it today." Loretta managed a soft exhale that almost passed for a laugh. "I reckon she doesn't even know she did." "Oh, she knows," Pearl said, tapping the church bulletin against her palm. "That kind of pretty don't happen by accident." From across the room, Danielle's laughter rose again, this time wrapped around the pastor's wife's name. Loretta caught a flash of her son's face. Polite, uneasy, avoiding eye contact. Micah adjusted his tie, nodded at something Danielle whispered, and smiled that thin, placid smile Loretta recognized from years of silence. "That's his extended family." The phrase echoed in her ears, colder each time, like someone erasing her, word by word. She'd been there when Micah learned to ride his bike on the cracked driveway, when he brought home report cards, bruised knees, wedding announcements. She'd opened her home when his savings ran dry. She'd folded his shirts, kept the lights on, and never once asked when they planned to leave. Extended, as if she were a distant aunt, as if the home she'd built with her own hands were a guest house. Loretta's jaw tightened, the way it used to when her late husband forgot to scrape his plate before setting it in the sink. It wasn't anger, not yet, but a firm, steady gathering of resolve, the kind that sits quiet before a storm knows its name. Pearl slipped her arm through Loretta's. "Come on, honey, let's get ourselves a lemonade before I say something I'll need to pray about later." Loretta let herself be led toward the refreshment table. She smiled when greeted, nodded at the choir ladies, even helped a little boy tie the ribbon back on his Bible. On the outside, nothing seemed amiss. But inside, a boundary had been drawn, invisible, sharp, and absolute. At the doorway, Danielle passed again, still radiant, still talking. She didn't glance Loretta's way, but her perfume drifted behind her. Bright, citrus, a little too young for 40. The smell turned Loretta's stomach. Pearl leaned in. "You all right, sugar?" Loretta's voice came low, even, and calm enough to chill the air around them. "That's a mighty short distance," she said, eyes on Danielle's retreating back, from blood to background. Pearl didn't answer, just squeezed her arm. Loretta turned toward the church exit, sunlight slicing across the floorboards. The crowd behind her laughed, sang, shuffled on. She walked out with her head high, the hymn book still pressed against her chest. Outside, the wind shifted, lifting the edge of her shawl like a whisper. She looked toward the parking lot, where her son's car waited, Danielle already in the front seat. For the first time in years, Loretta didn't follow them home. The afternoon light slanted low across the kitchen table, catching the dust motes that swayed like lazy dancers in the air. Loretta sat perfectly still, one palm resting on a thin manila folder. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock above the stove and the low hum of the refrigerator. The folder wasn't new. Its edges were soft from years of being opened and closed. Inside were the things that built a life: closing papers, bank statements, the yellowing copy of a deed that still bore her late husband's careful handwriting on the witness line. The ink had faded, but her name, Loretta Mae Dixon, was printed bold and unchallenged at the top. She smoothed a finger over it, tracing the letters like prayer beads. The house on East Larkspur Drive had cost them $82,000 back in '93. She remembered standing in the front yard with her husband, the sold sign leaning crooked in the grass, both of them laughing about how the porch paint peeled like a bad sunburn. They'd fixed it together, one brush stroke at a time. Now, 32 years later, the same porch sagged under different feet, ones that never scraped their shoes clean before walking in. Loretta let out a slow breath and leaned back in her chair. She could still see Danielle's painted smile from that morning, hear the easy way she'd said extended family, like the words didn't cost a thing. But the paper under Loretta's hand told another story, one written long before Danielle ever came around. The back door creaked, and a cool breeze slipped through the screen. Outside, the garden beds were thinning for fall. She'd pulled the last of the tomatoes that morning, their skins wrinkled but sweet. Danielle hadn't lifted a finger to help. She never did. Micah had asked to move in after the layoff. Loretta hadn't hesitated. He was her boy, after all. "Just until you get back on your feet," she'd said. That was 4 years ago. He'd gotten back on his feet all right, but never off her property. Danielle arrived soon after, suitcase first, gratitude last. No rent, no title change, no thanks. Loretta rose and crossed to the cabinet where she kept the land records, insurance papers, and tax receipts. She pulled down the thick folder marked home and laid it open beside the deed. Her name again, page after page, in black and white. She smiled. Small, private, unshaken. Extended family. she whispered, and almost laughed. The phone rang. She didn't jump. She'd been expecting that number to glow across the screen. Pearl, she answered. You home already? Mm-hmm. I had to sit in my car 10 minutes just to keep from saying something in the parking lot, Pearl said. That woman's nerve could stretch a mile and still not snap. Loretta chuckled softly. You heard it too, didn't you? Every syllable, Pearl said. So did the pastor. He looked like he swallowed a hymn sideways. That image drew a real laugh from Loretta, a low, throaty sound that surprised her. Well, I reckon the good Lord wanted witnesses. Pearl hesitated. You okay, sugar? Loretta's gaze fell again on the paper, her fingertip pressing against the ink. I'm steady, she said. Just thinking it might be time folks remember whose roof they're standing under. There was a pause on the line, the kind that carried a friend's knowing silence. You thinking what I think you're thinking? Pearl asked finally. Loretta didn't answer right away. She looked toward the hallway, at the photograph still hanging there. Micah at his high school graduation, her husband in his Sunday suit, Emma with missing front teeth. A lifetime arranged neatly in frames. None of them extended anything. Sometimes, Loretta said, voice quiet but sharp-edged, you don't have to raise your voice to take back a house. You just need to open the right drawer. Pearl exhaled a long sigh. If you're fixin' to do what I suspect, make sure it's done clean. Clean's the only way I know, Loretta replied. After they hung up, Loretta reached for the bottom drawer of the hutch and pulled out a blue pen, the same kind her husband used to sign the deed all those years ago. The click echoed louder than it should have. Outside, a car door slammed, Danielle's voice bright and chirpy, cutting through the air like perfume again. Loretta didn't move. She just pressed the pen tip to the paper and drew a small check mark beside her name. A symbol, nothing more, but something final sparked behind it. The wind nudged the curtains inward, soft and restless. The papers fluttered once as if the house itself exhaled. Loretta straightened, eyes steady on the open folder. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd make an appointment. And when she did, Danielle Dixon was going to learn exactly whose name the Lord had written on this home. The next morning broke gray and windless, the kind of Carolina quiet that always came before rain. Loretta dressed in her good wool coat, the one with the pearl buttons she'd sewn herself. She pressed a hand over her purse once, making sure the folder inside was flat and safe. Then she locked the front door behind her and walked to her car without looking back at the windows, especially the one where Danielle liked to hang her wind chimes. Downtown Greensboro was waking up slow. Coffee shops flicked on their neon signs, and the courthouse pigeons were already arguing over crumbs. Loretta parked across from a small brick building with a fading sign that read, Legal Aid for Seniors, Dignity Through Justice. She sat there for a minute, listening to the tick of her engine cooling. Dignity. That word felt right. Inside, the office smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. A young man at the reception desk looked up, surprised to see someone who carried herself like a woman walking into court rather than asking for help. Ma'am, can I help you? I'm here to see Miss Hargrove, Loretta said. Tina Hargrove. She's expecting me. He nodded and motioned toward a back hallway lined with bulletin boards and posters about elder rights. At the end of it sat a woman in her 60s with cropped silver hair and reading glasses perched low on her nose. She was typing fast, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling by her elbow. You must be Mrs. Dixon, the woman said without looking up. Her voice had the no-nonsense rasp of someone who'd been arguing with bureaucrats for decades. Yes, ma'am, Loretta Mae Dixon. Tina finally looked up, eyes sharp but kind. All right, Mrs. Dixon. Let's see what kind of trouble needs cleaning up. Loretta smiled faintly. I'm not in trouble, but I think someone under my roof might be. That earned the first smirk of the morning. Sit down and tell me what's what. Loretta opened the manila folder on the desk, smoothing out the deed as though presenting a family Bible. This here is my house. Bought it with my husband in '93, paid it off in full 12 years later. No mortgage, no liens, no co-owners. Tina nodded slowly, scanning the paperwork. And now? My son and his wife have been living there 4 years. He moved in after he lost his job. She came along after. I didn't ask rent, didn't change a thing on the title. Figured it was family. Tina clicked her pen. And I'm guessing that grace ran its course? Loretta folded her hands on her lap. Let's just say my daughter-in-law forgot her manners in a very public place yesterday. Called me extended family in front of half the church. That drew a small whistle from Tina. Well, that's cold-blooded. Colder than she knows, Loretta said quietly. Tina leaned back, appraising her. So what are you hoping to do, Mrs. Dixon? Loretta met her gaze, steady as a judge. I want to remind her who gave her every room she walks through. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the tapping of rain against the window pane. Then Tina nodded once, slow and deliberate. We can do that. Legally. Cleanly. She flipped a stack of forms toward Loretta and slid her a pen. This starts the 30-day notice. It's not eviction in the ugly sense. Not if you handle it right. Just a reminder, like you said. Signed and sealed. Loretta picked up the pen, felt its weight. How long they got once it's filed? 30 days from delivery. Not a second more. Loretta began filling in the blanks in her careful looping script. Name, address, relationship. The lines filled up neat and sure, each stroke of ink another measure of control returning to her chest. Tina studied her hands as she wrote. You've done this kind of thing before? Loretta gave a small shake of her head. Never had to. My husband and I always believed folks would act right if you treated 'em right. And when they don't? Loretta finished the last line and signed her name with a flourish. Then you remind them whose name the roof's under. Tina smiled, slid the paper into a file and stamped it with the heavy clunk of finality. Consider them reminded. Loretta gathered her folder, stood, and adjusted her coat. Outside, the rain had started, tapping against the glass like small, hurried fingers. Tina's voice followed her toward the door. If you need me again, call. I don't do messy, but I do fair. Loretta paused at the threshold and looked back. Fair's all I'm asking. She stepped outside, the cool drizzle soaking into her shawl. Across the street, the courthouse bell began to toll noon, deep and slow. Each ring seemed to hammer the moment into place. Loretta looked up through the rain and whispered, not to anyone in particular. Let's see how extended she feels when her 30 days start counting. And with that, she walked toward her car, rain beating on the envelope in her purse, the paper that would change everything. Sunday morning dawned clear and sharp, the kind of October light that made every edge in the kitchen look cleaner than it was. The smell of coffee and fried sausage curled through the house, but Loretta didn't move from her seat by the window. Her church dress, navy with small pearl buttons, hung crisp on her shoulders, her Bible resting in her lap. From the kitchen came the clatter of dishes and Danielle's voice, sweet as syrup when guests were listening, flat as cold iron when they weren't. Loretta, she called, not looking up from the griddle. Be a dear and grab some napkins from the pantry. I told Micah to set the table, but you know how he is. Loretta's eyes flicked to the envelope on the counter, the one Tina had stamped and sealed 2 days earlier. The paper inside it had a quiet gravity, like something blessed and dangerous all at once. She rose slowly, her heels clicking against the tile. I'll bring something better than napkins, she said. Danielle didn't hear the undertone. She was too busy fussing over her biscuits, Loretta's old recipe, though she never gave credit. At the table, Micah sat reading the church bulletin, pretending to be invisible. Emma picked at her eggs, her fork tracing small patterns on the plate. The air between them all had thickened, like humidity before a storm. Loretta took her time walking in, envelope in hand. She placed it gently on the table beside Danielle's plate, careful not to let the coffee cup tip over onto it. Danielle glanced down, distracted. "What's this?" "30 days," Loretta said, her voice calm, measured. "That's what the paper says." For a second, the only sound was the hiss of butter still melting in the skillet. Danielle laughed. Short, high, brittle. "You're kidding." Loretta didn't smile. "You can read it if you'd like." Micah lowered the bulletin slowly, eyes moving between them. His lips parted, but no words came out. Danielle wiped her hands on a towel, snatched the envelope, and tore it open. As her eyes moved over the words, the color drained from her face. You're evicting us?" "I'm giving notice," Loretta said. "There's a difference." "You can't just—" Danielle sputtered, clutching the paper. "This is our home." Loretta leaned a hand against the back of a chair. "It's my home. You were guests, and I think it's time the visit ended." Micah looked like he wanted to vanish into the wallpaper. "Mama, this isn't the way." "Then tell me the way, son," Loretta interrupted softly, "because 4 years is a long time for me to keep pretending you'll figure it out." Danielle's jaw set. "You think anyone at church is going to be on your side after this? You'll look mean. Petty." Loretta tilted her head. "I'm 71, Danielle. I've outlived what folks think of me." Across the table, Emma's small voice broke the silence. "Grandma?" Loretta turned, her tone softening. "Yes, baby." Are we leaving?" Danielle snapped. "Emma, eat your breakfast." Loretta crouched beside her granddaughter's chair, ignoring the sharp edge in Danielle's tone. "You don't have to worry about anything. Grown-ups make messes and grown-ups clean them up." Emma nodded, her lower lip trembling. When Loretta stood, Danielle was glaring, the notice trembling in her hand. "You'll regret this," she said. "You don't understand what you're starting." Loretta looked her straight in the eye. "Maybe not. But I do understand what I'm finishing." Micah's gaze dropped to his coffee, his silence louder than shouting. He'd never been good at picking sides. He'd just let the tide carry him, no matter who drowned. Loretta walked to the oven, turned off the heat, and pulled the pan of biscuits onto the counter. The tops were golden, flaky, perfect. Danielle's best batch yet. "Go on and eat," Loretta said, untying her apron and laying it neatly aside. "I'm not hungry." She started toward the doorway. Behind her, Danielle's voice cracked, half anger, half disbelief. "You can't just walk away after dropping something like that." Loretta paused, one hand on the frame. "Danielle," she said, turning slightly, "you asked for napkins. What you got was notice." Then she stepped into the hallway. Emma watched her grandmother pass, silent, small fingers gripping the table's edge. Danielle crumpled the notice in her fist, her nails biting into the paper, and Micah didn't move to stop her. From the other room, the front door opened, then shut with a gentle click. The smell of biscuits lingered, rich and warm, but no one reached for them. The following Sunday, the church bells rang brighter than usual, clear, assertive, like they knew someone inside had unfinished business. Loretta stepped out of her car, smoothing her gloves and lifting her chin to the sky. It was cool, but sunny, that stubborn kind of Carolina autumn that couldn't make up its mind whether to bless or bite. She walked through the front doors of the sanctuary with her Bible tucked close, the same calm expression she'd worn every Sunday since the notice went out. Only this time, her calm wasn't submission. It was steel, polished to a shine. The pews filled fast. Families clustered, fans fluttered, and Miss Pearl Bennett stood by the bulletin rack, handing them out with her usual commentary whispered between smiles. Loretta caught her friend's eye across the aisle. Pearl gave a tiny nod that said everything. "You ready?" Loretta sat near the front, third row center, where no one could mistake her presence. Danielle and Micah slipped in late. Danielle in a coral dress too bright for the season, Micah looking like he'd slept in his tie. They took a seat near the back, pretending they didn't see her. Emma, pressed between them, looked small, her hands folded tight in her lap. The service moved slow at first. Hymns, prayer requests, the offering plate. Pastor Mayfield, a soft-spoken man with a baritone voice, stood for announcements. His words rolled gentle across the congregation until he glanced down at the slip of paper in his hand. "Before we close," he said, "does anyone else have something they'd like to share?" A hush followed, the polite kind where folks look around to make sure it isn't them. Then Loretta rose. Her knees didn't shake. "Pastor," she said, her voice even but carrying, "I just wanted to thank the church for keeping me and mine in prayer this past week." A few heads turned. Danielle stiffened. Loretta continued, "Sometimes folks forget who holds the keys, but God doesn't." The air changed. It wasn't loud, just thick, like the first moment before thunder cracks. Pastor Mayfield's eyes flickered, then he nodded once, slow, approving. "Well said, Sister Dixon," he replied. "That's a word for somebody today." Pearl, sitting 2 pews over, lifted her chin slightly, her eyes glinting behind her bifocals. She already knew she'd be printing that quote before noon. Loretta sat down again, folding her hands over her Bible. Her pulse thrummed steady. Behind her, whispers rippled through the pews. Danielle's cheeks flushed the color of her dress. Micah cleared his throat, pretending to study the hymnal, but his hands fumbled the pages. When service ended, the murmur of conversation filled the sanctuary like bees around a hive. People lined up to shake the pastor's hand, compliment the sermon, gossip softly by the vestibule. Pearl joined Loretta near the side door, clutching her clipboard. "Well," she said, tapping it lightly, "I think that was the cleanest slice of truth I've seen served before noon." "I just spoke plain," Loretta said, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "Sometimes that's enough." "You mind if I use that in the bulletin?" Pearl asked, half teasing. "Use whatever you want." God was listening. Pearl's grin widened. Oh, he was. And so was everybody else. Across the room, Danielle was trying and failing to look unbothered. She stood surrounded by her usual circle of church ladies, her laughter a beat too loud, her posture too stiff. One of them leaned close, whispered something, and Danielle's jaw clenched before she forced another brittle smile. From a nearby pew, 3 older women watched the scene unfold. One shook her head slowly. "She's stronger than she looks," whispered the first. "Always was," the second replied. "And that one in coral," the third added. "Might want to learn not to poke the lion when she's holding the deed." Loretta didn't turn around, but she heard every word. As people began filing out, Micah brushed past without meeting her eyes. He mumbled something. "See you later." Maybe. But his voice barely carried. He didn't wait for a reply. Loretta watched him leave, Danielle trailing after him in a cloud of perfume and indignation. Emma turned once, gave her grandmother a small wave, then hurried to catch up. Pearl exhaled. "Well, sugar, you sure set a record today." Loretta tucked her bulletin under her arm. "Records are meant to be kept, Pearl, and some are meant to be broken." They walked out into the sunlight, the warm wind stirring the fallen leaves along the steps. Behind them, the church bell began to ring, 12 slow, solemn chimes. Pearl squeezed her hand. "You done opened the first door, Loretta." Loretta looked toward the parking lot, where Danielle was arguing with Micah beside the car, her hands slicing the air. "No," she said softly. "I just locked one." The sound of the final bell lingered in the air like a promise. The morning after her words went into the church bulletin, Loretta woke before sunrise. The air held that crisp October bite, the kind that made the house groan when the heat kicked on. She stood in the hallway, her hand on the banister, listening to the stillness. It felt different now, cleaner somehow, though nothing visible had changed. By 8 o'clock, she was sitting across from Tina Hargrove again, a thermos of coffee in hand. The legal aid office was quiet except for the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the rustle of papers. Tina skimmed through a manila folder and tapped one page with her pen. "You've got every right to enforce boundaries, Mrs. Dixon. You've served notice, you've got ownership. But if you want to keep things civil and safe, you might consider changing the locks." Loretta raised an eyebrow. She's still got her 30 days. "That's right," Tina said, leaning back. "She's got 30 days to vacate, not 30 days to have a key. The law says you have to allow reasonable access, but you decide what's reasonable." Loretta turned that over in her mind, slow and careful, like a coin between her fingers. "You think that's fair?" Tina smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't warm so much as earned. "Fair's not always soft, Mrs. Dixon. Sometimes it's just firm." By afternoon, Loretta was at the hardware store. The man behind the counter was young enough to call her ma'am without irony. He boxed up 2 new deadbolts and a fresh set of keys, shiny and gold. "Doing some security updates?" he asked. Loretta smiled faintly. "Just tightening what's already mine." When she got home, she waited until the house was empty, Micah at work, Danielle gone somewhere in her endless social whirl. Then she called a handyman from church, a quiet fellow named Mr. Boyd, who didn't ask questions. Within an hour, the old locks lay in a small pile on the porch, dull and scratched. By the time Danielle's car pulled into the driveway, the last bolt clicked neatly into place. Loretta was sweeping the porch when Danielle marched up the steps, heels biting into the wood. "What's going on here?" she snapped. Loretta didn't stop sweeping. "Just housework." Danielle reached for the doorknob. The key turned, halfway, then stuck. She tried again, jiggling, rattling, then pulling back sharply. "It's jammed," she said, glaring. "No," Loretta replied, setting the broom aside. "It's changed." Danielle's eyes widened. "You changed the locks? You can't do that. I still live here?" Loretta met her gaze evenly. "You live here for now. You don't hold the keys." For a moment, Danielle stood frozen, breath coming fast. "You're being vindictive." "I'm being careful." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You can knock for the next month, Danielle. I'll decide when the door opens." Danielle opened her mouth to argue, but the screen door creaked. Emma stepped out from the car, backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked between them, her mother's fury, her grandmother's calm, and her voice came small. "Grandma?" Loretta softened instantly. "Yes, sweetheart." "Can I still come in?" Loretta crouched a little, enough to meet the girl's eyes. "My door's never locked to love," she said. Emma smiled weakly and walked toward her. Danielle's voice cracked like glass. "Emma, get back here." But Loretta opened the door just enough for Emma to slip inside. "She's just getting her homework," Loretta said. "You can wait on the porch." Danielle's jaw trembled. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? You're embarrassing yourself." Loretta held her ground. "No, ma'am, I embarrassed myself when I let prideful people live under my roof rent-free." Danielle let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snarl. "You'll pay for this." Loretta tilted her head. "Already did. Every light bill, every grocery trip, every gallon of paint you never lifted a brush for. But payments stop today." For once, Danielle didn't have a quick comeback. She stormed off the porch, heels crunching down the gravel drive. Loretta exhaled slowly and leaned against the post, her heartbeat steady. She could still hear Emma inside, humming softly as she packed her school books. The front yard shimmered with late sunlight, the trees throwing gold on the grass. For the first time in months, Loretta felt the space around her breathe. Mr. Boyd's truck rumbled away down the road, leaving her alone with the sound of cicadas beginning their evening chorus. She turned the new key in the lock. Smooth, solid, final. The letter came on a Thursday, folded crisp in a white envelope that looked official even before she opened it. Loretta set it on the kitchen counter beside her mug of chicory coffee and stared at the return address. Guilford County Civil Services Division. She didn't sigh, didn't curse, just smiled. That tight. Knowing kind that meant she'd been expecting this sooner or later. Inside, the notice was written in language meant to sound polite, but Loretta knew venom when she read it. Claim of unlawful eviction without just cause. Danielle Dixon's name printed bold underneath, like she'd been waiting her whole life to see it on government paper. Loretta folded the letter once, twice, then reached for the phone. Tina. The paralegal's voice came through the line, brisk and steady. Tell me she didn't actually file. She did. Said I put her out unjustly. Good Lord. Tina's chair squeaked. All right, don't you worry. Bring the paperwork tomorrow. We'll handle this quick. Loretta poured the rest of her coffee down the sink, rinsed the cup, and set it upside down on the drying rack. I figured you'd say that. Mrs. Dixon, Tina said gently. She can't win this. Not on paper. Loretta smiled faintly. I'm counting on that. By noon the next day, she was back in the legal aid office. Tina's desk looked the same. Neat piles, half-empty coffee cup, computer humming softly. Tina read the complaint aloud, eyebrows lifting higher with each paragraph. She's claiming you changed the locks without notice, denied access to property, and caused emotional distress. Loretta raised one eyebrow. I expect her distress has more to do with being told no for once. Tina grinned. You're not wrong, but the good news is we've got everything we need. She flipped open a thick file and began stacking documents in order. The original deed, the 30-day notice stamped and filed, the receipts, the witness statement from Pearl confirming the delivery. Every page bore Loretta's name like an unbroken line of defense. No lease, Tina said, tapping the top of the pile. No rent agreement, no ownership transfer. You've got every right to reclaim possession. Loretta nodded, her voice low. She thought this house was a gift without strings. She forgot that gratitude was one of them. Tina smiled at that. Let me take this down to the clerk's office. We'll get it stamped and returned before lunch. When she came back, she set the newly stamped folder on Loretta's lap. The red seal shone in the corner like a small medal of justice. There you go, Tina said. Official ruling. No lease, no rights, no case. She's got nothing but attitude. Loretta smoothed her palm over the embossed edge. Sometimes that's the heaviest thing a person can carry. That afternoon, Miss Pearl showed up at the back door holding a warm pecan pie wrapped in foil. I figured victory tastes better with sugar, she said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. Loretta laughed softly. You read my mind. They sat at the table with 2 forks, eating straight from the pan while the ceiling fan spun lazy above them. So it's over? Pearl asked. On paper, yes. In spirit, she'll drag it out another week or 2, but the county clerk made it clear. It's mine. Pearl took another bite, her eyes twinkling. Then maybe now you can rest easy. Loretta hesitated, looking toward the hallway where Emma's school photos hung. Not just yet. There's still one name I need to add to something. She rose, went to her desk, and pulled out the small envelope marked medical info. Emergency contacts. With a slow hand, she crossed out the old name written under secondary contact, Micah Dixon. In its place, she wrote carefully, Emma L. Dixon. She set the pen down and studied the ink drying on the page. At least one of them still has good sense. Pearl smiled. That girl loves you. Loretta nodded, a quiet pride softening her expression. Love's all that keeps a house standing, Pearl, but law keeps the doors shut to what don't belong. Outside, a car door slammed. The sound carried through the thin October air, followed by a silence that hummed with tension. Loretta didn't move to the window. She didn't have to. She already knew whose voice would rise first. Danielle. Muffled, sharp, breaking through the peace like gravel under tires. Pearl's fork paused midair. You expecting company? Loretta stood, calm as ever. No, she said, her voice almost a whisper. But I reckon trouble doesn't need an invitation when it's already on borrowed time. The next morning smelled like dust and lemon polish. Loretta stood at the doorway of the guest bedroom, Danielle's self-declared sanctuary, and surveyed the battlefield. The vanity overflowed with lotions she never used. Clothes lay in careless heaps, and the dresser drawers hung open like mouths mid-argument. Loretta tied her apron a little tighter and pulled 3 cardboard boxes from the hallway. On the top one, she wrote in tidy black marker, Donation. It wasn't anger driving her, it was order. The house had waited long enough to breathe. One by one, she wrapped Danielle's glass perfume bottles in newspaper, the soft crinkle breaking the silence. She moved to the dresser next. Sweaters, scarves, a half-dozen boutique handbags that still had their tags. Danielle had always been more decoration than gratitude. Loretta set aside what might sell, a white quilt set, barely used, and carried it to the kitchen table. She took out her phone, snapped a clean photo in the sunlight, and typed out a listing. Guest bedroom set, gently used, $200 OBO. Pickup only. When she hit post, she didn't bother to double-check spelling. The clatter of the keys felt final enough. From the porch came the sound of a car pulling up, tires crunching gravel, a door slam, then footsteps. Fast, sharp, coming closer. Danielle's voice cut through the air like broken glass. What are you doing? Loretta didn't look up. She kept folding a stack of towels, calm as a preacher before the benediction. Danielle stormed into the kitchen, eyes blazing. You're boxing up my things? You're throwing me out like trash. Loretta finally met her gaze. Trash gets picked up, Danielle. This is called cleanup. The words landed like a gavel. Danielle's hands trembled. You have no right. I have every right, Loretta interrupted, her tone still low, steady. Paperwork's filed, clerks stamped it. 30 days means 30 days, not 30 tantrums. For a moment, Danielle seemed to shrink, her outrage struggling for air. You just want to humiliate me, she hissed. Loretta shook her head. No, ma'am, you managed that yourself. Just then, a soft knock sounded on the open door. Morning, Pearl, Loretta said, without turning. Miss Pearl Bennett stepped in carrying a donation bag and her usual no-nonsense expression. You said you needed an extra pair of hands. Right on time, Loretta replied. Danielle's jaw dropped. You brought her here? To go through my things? Pearl set her purse down and smiled, the kind of smile that could slice without drawing blood. If you left anything worth keeping, honey, you might want to check the lost and found. Danielle turned scarlet. You two are pathetic. Old, bitter, petty. Loretta's hand came up, quiet but firm. Enough. I've given you respect, space, food, and peace under my roof. All I'm taking back is what's mine. The house fell silent except for the soft, tearing sound of packing tape sealing another box. Danielle stood there, lips pressed tight, eyes glassy. Then she spun on her heel and stormed down the hall. A minute later, The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Pearl let out a long breath. Lord, she's got a bark on her. Loretta nodded. That's all it is. Bark. They worked in rhythm after that, quiet but purposeful. Pearl boxed up shoes. Loretta gathered framed photos Danielle had hung of herself in fancy dresses. She stacked them neatly, face down, in a corner. By the time the sun dipped toward afternoon, the guest room looked like a blank slate again. Just walls, carpet, and a window that finally let the light back in. Pearl brushed her hands off. I'll take these donation boxes over to the shelter before supper. Thank you, Loretta said. Leave the small one. I'll take that one myself. They walked toward the door, and that's when Loretta noticed Emma standing in the hallway. She hadn't made a sound. The girl's backpack hung loose off her shoulder. Her expression caught somewhere between confusion and sorrow. Hey there, sugar, Pearl said softly, slipping past her with the boxes. Emma waited until Pearl left, then stepped closer to Loretta. Mama said you're trying to erase us. Loretta knelt, her knees creaking but her gaze gentle. No, baby, I'm just clearing space for peace. There's a difference. Emma swallowed hard, then reached into her pocket. Her small fingers opened to reveal a thin silver bracelet, tarnished, child-sized with a tiny heart charm. I made this at Bible camp, she whispered. I want you to keep it. Loretta took it, the metal cool against her palm. You sure? Emma nodded. It's just, I don't want you to forget me when we move. Loretta's throat tightened. Oh, sweetheart, you're the one thing I couldn't forget if I tried. She pulled Emma close, the girl's head resting under her chin. Outside, a car horn blared. Danielle, impatient, waiting. Emma pulled away slowly, eyes glistening. Bye, Grandma. Loretta stood in the doorway, watching her walk down the steps. When the car door shut and the sound faded down the street, the house fell back into stillness. She looked at the bracelet in her palm, light catching the heart charm just so. Then she whispered to the empty room. This house won't remember her perfume, but it'll remember you. Rain came down steady that Monday, tapping against the kitchen window like fingertips asking to be let in. Loretta sat at the table with the manila folder open in front of her, the red county seal glinting faintly in the light. The smell of coffee mingled with the sharper scent of lemon cleaner. Everything in the house was in its place now. Every counter cleared, every picture hung straight. It was the kind of order that came only after war. A car door slammed outside. Loretta didn't look up. She heard the shuffle of familiar feet, hesitant ones, and then the knock. 2 short taps, 1 long. Come in, Micah. Her son stepped into the kitchen, rain dripping off the brim of his cap. He looked smaller than she remembered. Shoulders slumped, eyes hollow from too many nights caught between 2 loyalties. Mama, he said quietly, can we talk? Loretta gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Talking's free. Micah sat, rubbing his hands together. His wedding ring caught the light, dull from neglect. Danielle's been packing, he said after a pause. She's taking it hard. Loretta folded the deed file closed, her hand resting on it. I imagine she is? She says you blindsided her. Loretta's voice was steady. She blindsided me in front of a congregation. Fair's fair. Micah sighed, running a hand through his hair. She'll never forgive this, Mama. Loretta leaned forward, her eyes sharp but calm. She never asked for my permission to shame me either. Forgiveness goes both ways. He looked down, jaw tight. You could have talked to me first. Loretta tilted her head. I did, Micah. 4 years of talking. You just called it nagging. That silenced him. The rain filled the space between them, pattering against the porch roof like applause. She slid the manila folder across the table. You might as well see it. He hesitated, then opened it. The first page bore the county clerk's seal. Stamped. Filed. Irrevocable. His eyes moved over the pages like a man reading a eulogy. "It's official?" he murmured. "It's final," Loretta said. "You and Danielle will be fine. You've both got jobs now. You'll find a place that fits the life she wants to live. This one's already spoken for." Micah stared at the paper a moment longer, then pushed it back toward her. "You sure this is what Daddy would have wanted?" Loretta's lips pressed together. "Your daddy believed in peace under his own roof. I'm just restoring it." He exhaled, long and weary, and looked toward the window. "Emma's been asking why everything feels different. I don't know what to tell her." "Tell her truth," Loretta said softly, "that sometimes love means closing a door before it breaks off the hinges." Micah nodded, though she could tell he didn't quite understand. He stood, the chair scraping quietly against the floor. "I'll tell Danielle we'll be out by Friday." Loretta nodded once. "That'll do." He started for the door but paused, hand on the frame. "Mama?" "Yes?" "She said you're trying to make an example of her." Loretta smiled faintly. "No, son. The example's already been made. I'm just letting it echo." When he left, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 2 days later, Loretta sat again across from Tina Hargrove at the Legal Aid Center. Tina was flipping through the finalized paperwork, adding it to a thick case file. "Everything's signed, sealed, and logged," Tina said. "You're covered every which way. The sheriff's department even has a copy, just in case." Loretta nodded. "Thank you." Tina's tone softened. "You did this right, Mrs. Dixon. I've seen messier endings." "You kept it clean?" Loretta smiled. "Clean's the only way I know." Tina handed her the final copy of the case file. "Keep this somewhere safe." "I will," Loretta said. She slipped it into her handbag like scripture. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement gleaming. She took her time walking to the car, feeling the ground firm beneath her shoes. That Sunday, the congregation buzzed even before the service began. Word traveled fast in small towns, faster still in sanctuaries. Loretta could feel eyes on her as she took her usual seat, third row center. Pearl slipped in beside her with the bulletin tucked under her arm. "You know they're all whispering," Pearl murmured. "You and Danielle are the week's sermon." Loretta smiled. "Then let's give them a verse worth remembering." Midway through service, Pastor Mayfield called her name. "Sister Dixon," he said, voice warm but weighty. "On behalf of the congregation, thank you for your steadfast example. Some examples need to be made." Heads turned. Danielle, sitting stiffly near the back, went pale. Loretta rose, not to gloat, but to acknowledge. "Sometimes," she said simply, "peace costs more than pride, but it's worth the price." The pastor nodded. "Amen to that." The congregation echoed, a low hum of agreement rolling through the pews. Loretta sat again, hands folded over her lap, eyes fixed straight ahead. She didn't look back. Not at Danielle, not at Micah, but she could feel the shift in the air. The tide had turned, and everyone knew which way it was flowing. After the service, Pearl found her outside on the church steps. "That was some answer you gave in there," she said. Loretta looked out toward the parking lot, where Danielle stood alone by the car, talking into her phone, shoulders tight with anger. "I just told the truth," Loretta said, "but truth's loud when folks have been lying long enough." Pearl slipped her arm through hers. "You think she'll stop fighting now?" Loretta's gaze didn't waver. "No. She'll try something else. People like her always do." By Friday morning, the house didn't feel like home. It felt like an echo chamber. Every footstep, every closing door, every breath sounded louder than it should have. The last 3 days had been thick with tension, words unsaid curling in the corners like dust that refused to settle. Loretta was up early, the first sunlight creeping through the kitchen blinds. She laid out 2 slices of bread, buttered them slow, and turned on her old radio. Mahalia Jackson's voice filled the room, smooth and certain, cutting through the quiet like a benediction. From down the hall came the first slam, a cabinet, then a dresser drawer. Danielle's voice followed, muffled, sharp, punctuated by the thud of something heavy hitting the floor. Loretta didn't flinch. She spread mustard across the bread, layered the ham just right, and hummed along with the gospel. "Didn't it rain, children?" she sang softly. "Oh, my Lord, didn't it rain?" The song carried through the house like a calm rebuke. Another slam, this one closer. Danielle's heels clicked across the hallway. "You could at least pretend to feel bad about this," she shouted. Loretta kept humming, slicing the sandwich diagonally. "You want some lunch before you go?" Danielle appeared in the doorway, eyes rimmed red. A cardboard box clutched against her hip. "You're unbelievable. I've been called worse." Behind her, Micah trudged past carrying another box, head down. His silence was armor, and it didn't fit him well. He brushed past without meeting his mother's eyes, mumbling something about loading the truck. "Movers are here," he said. Loretta nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Good. I made sandwiches for them, too." Danielle let out a bitter laugh. "Feeding strangers before your own family. Real Christian of you." Loretta turned off the radio and faced her. "Strangers know how to say thank you." That stopped Danielle cold, but only for a heartbeat. She huffed and stormed down the hall again, another door slamming in her wake. Pearl's voice floated in from the porch. "You need me to shoo her out, sugar? I brought my patience and a folding chair." Loretta smiled faintly. "You stay right where you are. Porch is the safest place in this storm." Outside, Pearl sat primly beside her handbag, sunglasses perched on her nose, watching the movers heft Danielle's boxes into the truck. She looked for all the world like she was enjoying a matinee performance. Inside, Loretta moved room to room, straightening what had been left behind. The kitchen table, the hallway rug, the coat rack by the door, all lighter now. Freer. When she reached the living room, she stopped. Emma stood by the piano, small and quiet, a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. "Grandma?" the girl asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, baby?" Emma's chin quivered. "Can I still come visit?" Loretta crouched down, taking both of her granddaughter's hands in hers. "You'll always have a key, sweetheart. This house'll never be closed to you." Emma blinked fast, trying to keep tears from falling. "Mama says you don't want us here anymore." Loretta shook her head. "I just don't want the noise, baby. There's a difference." Emma nodded, lip trembling. She leaned forward and hugged her grandmother tight. Loretta held her close, breathing in the scent of her lavender shampoo, committing it to memory. From outside came the heavy thud of boxes stacked in the truck, followed by Danielle's clipped commands. The movers answered politely, their voices low and professional. When the hug broke, Emma looked up. "I'll call you every Sunday." "You do that," Loretta said, brushing a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "And I'll answer every time." Micah appeared in the doorway, eyes rimmed with guilt. He couldn't seem to stand still, hands fidgeting, gaze darting anywhere but at his mother. "Truck's loaded," he said softly. Loretta nodded. "Then you best get going before it rains again." Danielle stormed through behind him, carrying the last box. "Keep the damn place," she muttered under her breath. "You'll die alone in it." Loretta didn't rise to it. She just turned back to the counter, slicing the second sandwich. "That's the difference between us, Danielle," she said, without looking up. "I know the sound of peace, even when it's quiet." Danielle froze for half a second, then walked out the door. The screen slammed. Silence rolled in like a tide after a storm. Outside, Pearl stood and waved as the truck rumbled down the street. "There they go," she said. "Whole neighborhood can breathe again." Loretta joined her on the porch, folding her arms against the cool air. She watched until the truck disappeared beyond the row of maple trees. Pearl glanced over. "How's your heart feel, sugar?" Loretta took a long breath, exhaled slow, lighter than it has in years. But as she turned to go back inside, something caught her eye, the faintest glint of silver on the porch rail. Emma's bracelet. The tiny heart charm swayed in the breeze, glimmering like a secret left behind. Loretta picked it up and held it tight in her palm. By Saturday morning, the house finally sounded like itself again. No slamming doors, no perfume cloud laughter, no tension humming under every breath. Just the tick of the kitchen clock and the low creak of the porch swing moving in the breeze. Loretta poured herself a cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and looked around. The kitchen felt hollow, but not lonely. Empty shelves had their own kind of peace. The cabinets were bare where Danielle's glossy dishware had once gleamed, all mismatched pieces Loretta never liked anyway. She opened the laptop her granddaughter had helped her set up last Christmas and clicked through an online catalog. It didn't take long to find what she wanted: blue stoneware with speckled glaze, handmade in Asheville. Durable, simple, honest. She added a set for 2 to her cart, then another for good measure. When the order confirmation popped up, she smiled to herself. "Something new for a clean table," she murmured. The rest of the day was quiet work. She put on soft gospel music, nothing loud, just piano and voice, and started with the living room. Dusting the baseboards, straightening framed photos, wiping fingerprints off glass. It was the kind of deep cleaning that cleared the heart along with the house. In Danielle's old room, sunlight slanted across the carpet, revealing faint outlines where her furniture used to sit. Loretta gathered stray hangers, folded the curtains, and knelt to sweep under the bed. Her hand brushed against something paper crisp. She pulled it out. A crumpled church bulletin, folded in half and pressed thin like it had been stepped on more than once. Loretta smoothed it open against her knee. Across the front, printed in bold black type, was her own quote from 2 Sundays past. "Sometimes folks forget who holds the keys. God doesn't." Sister Loretta Dixon. She stared at it a long while. The ink was smudged in one corner as if a thumb had pressed there too hard. For a moment she saw Danielle sitting in that same pew, face red with embarrassment, pride cracking at the edges. And she wondered, not with cruelty, but with a strange tenderness, if maybe Danielle had taken this bulletin home to read again. Maybe to understand. Maybe not. Loretta folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. "You tried to erase me, girl," she whispered, "but looks like the paper remembered." A knock came at the open door. "You still scrubbing?" Pearl's voice drifted in, rich with humor. Loretta turned, smiling. "Trying to, but this house keeps telling on itself." Pearl stepped in holding a bag of groceries. "Brought you milk, and I figured we'd both earned a slice of cake that didn't come from a fundraiser." Loretta wiped her hands and gestured toward the counter. "Set it down, I've got coffee warming." Pearl set the bag down and took in the spotless kitchen. "Well, would you look at that? Not a speck of chaos left. You sure you didn't hire angels?" Loretta chuckled. "Just stubbornness and elbow grease." Pearl's eyes landed on the open laptop. "You ordering something fancy?" "Just dishes, blue stoneware. 1 set for me, 1 for Emma." Pearl's face softened. "For the next Sunday dinner?" "For every Sunday dinner," Loretta said, voice gentle but sure. They sat at the table with their cake and coffee, quiet for a moment. Sunlight poured through the window, catching in the steam from their cups. Pearl tapped the side of her mug. "You know, sugar, you preached without preaching. Loretta smiled at that, slow and knowing. Some messages stick louder when whispered. Pearl leaned back, a satisfied look crossing her face. You're something else, Loretta Mae Dixon. Whole county'll be quoting you by Easter. Loretta shook her head, laughing softly. Let them. I'm done with speaking. I'd rather live quiet and let my peace do the talking. They lingered in the calm, neither woman rushing the silence. Then the screen door rattled. A gust of wind, or maybe something more. The paper bulletin, still tucked in Loretta's pocket, rustled against the fabric of her apron. Pearl glanced toward the doorway. Wind's picking up again. Loretta nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. Sometimes it does that right before the air clears. Sunday settled soft over Greensboro, the kind of afternoon that felt washed clean. Sunlight spilled across the yard, catching on the trimmed hedges and the faint shimmer of fresh paint on the porch rail. The air carried the smell of cut grass and something new, quiet that wasn't empty but earned. Inside, the house gleamed. Every window wiped, every drawer organized, every corner free from the clutter of resentment. The blue stoneware dishes, her new ones, sat neatly in the cabinet, two stacked side by side. For the first time in years, Loretta felt like her home fit her skin again. She stood at the kitchen counter arranging the dinner plates, ham glazed with honey, green beans snapped fresh, and cornbread still warm from the oven. Nothing fancy, just enough to feed what mattered. The screen door creaked. Smells like a real Sunday, Pearl said, setting down a bouquet of daisies wrapped in brown paper. I brought flowers, and my appetite. Loretta smiled. Both are welcome. A car door slammed outside, followed by the quick patter of small feet. Emma's voice carried before she even reached the steps. Grandma, I didn't miss dinner, did I? Loretta's heart lifted. Not even close, baby. Come on in. Emma burst through the doorway, cheeks pink from the cool air, holding a small notebook to her chest. Mama dropped me off, said I could stay till tomorrow. Loretta's smile held steady, though she noted the absence of Danielle's car in the driveway. Then tomorrow it is. They gathered at the table, the three of them. Loretta set out the blue plates. Pearl poured the sweet tea. And Emma reached for the cornbread before Grace. Pearl teased, nudging her with a smile. Not before the good Lord gets his due. Emma giggled and folded her hands. Loretta bowed her head. Lord, thank you for clean hearts, open doors, and full plates. Amen. They ate slow, talking about simple things. Emma's school choir concert, Pearl's latest run-in with the church printer, the neighbor's cat that kept sunbathing on Loretta's porch swing. The conversation flowed easy, no sharp edges, no ghosts at the table. Afterward, they moved to the living room. Loretta poured coffee for Pearl and cocoa for Emma. The girl curled up on the couch, drawing in her notebook, her laughter a balm that filled every space that had been silent too long. Pearl leaned back, content. You done turned this house back into a home. Loretta smiled, tracing her finger along the rim of her cup. Took some pruning, but it's blooming again. They sat in companionable quiet, the kind that only comes when there's nothing left to prove. When Pearl finally stood to leave, the sky outside had turned amber. I'll see you Wednesday, sugar. Choir practice needs your voice. You'll hear it, Loretta said. Just don't expect me to hit the high notes anymore. Pearl laughed her way out the door, leaving behind the faint scent of talcum and flowers. Loretta turned to find Emma watching her from the couch, chin propped on her hands. You look lighter, Grandma, she said softly. Loretta tilted her head. Do I now? Yeah, like the house let go of a weight or something. Loretta smiled, setting her coffee cup down. Maybe it did. Emma's gaze drifted to the window. Mama said she's sorry. She said she shouldn't have said that thing at church. Loretta paused, then nodded once. That's good to hear. She said you probably won't forgive her. Loretta crossed to the desk, opened a small box and took out a folded sheet of paper. Forgiveness don't mean forgetting, baby. Sometimes it just means stop letting it hurt. Emma watched as she unfolded the paper. It was her will, freshly notarized, neat as everything else in Loretta's life. You putting my name on something? The girl asked shyly. Loretta smiled. Just making sure things go where they belong. You'll understand when you're older. She placed the paper back in its envelope and set it inside the desk drawer, locking it with a quiet click. The house was dim now, golden light fading into blue. Loretta walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and let her palm rest on the cool brass handle. For the first time in years, locking the door didn't feel like shutting something out. It felt like keeping peace in. Behind her, Emma whispered, "You look happy." Loretta turned and smiled, her eyes catching the lamplight. "I am, baby. I finally am." They sat together on the couch as the last light disappeared beyond the trees. The following Sunday dawned clear and gold, the kind of morning that seemed to hum with quiet purpose. Dew shimmered across the Dixon yard, catching the light like a thin layer of forgiveness. Loretta stood by her window, fastening the small gold brooch she hadn't worn since her husband's funeral. It caught the sun just enough to glint, a reminder of dignity that refused to dull. "Ready, Grandma?" Emma called from the doorway, her new dress the same shade as the sky. "Almost, baby." Loretta smoothed the hem of her jacket and took one last look at herself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, she looked exactly like the woman she felt, steady, whole, and untouchable. They drove together in Loretta's old sedan, gospel music filling the car, soft but strong. Pearl was waiting for them on the church steps, a bundle of white envelopes in one hand, her face lit with something mischievous. "Morning, sugar," she said, leaning in to hug Loretta. "You got no idea what's coming today." Loretta raised a brow. "Should I be worried?" Pearl grinned. "Not unless you're allergic to applause." Loretta laughed but said nothing more. She guided Emma toward their usual pew, third row, center. The sanctuary smelled of lilies and floor polish, sunlight spilling through stained glass and washing everything in jewel tones. As the choir began, Loretta found herself humming along, her voice blending with the congregation. It wasn't until halfway through the service, when Pastor Mayfield cleared his throat, that she noticed the shift, the stillness that meant something was about to happen. "Before we close today," the pastor said, his voice resonant, "we'd like to recognize a member of our church family. Someone who's been a pillar of quiet strength and grace. Someone who has shown us that peace isn't weakness, it's wisdom." Loretta frowned slightly, glancing toward Pearl, who only widened her grin. "Miss Pearl Bennett will take it from here," Pastor Mayfield said, stepping back. Pearl rose from her pew, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she climbed the steps to the pulpit. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and adjusted her glasses. "When the Women's Council met last month," she began, her voice carrying clear and sure, "we talked about honoring someone whose life preaches louder than any sermon. We decided to create something new, something we're calling the Legacy Matriarch Award." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Loretta's breath caught, realization dawning slow as sunrise. Pearl smiled straight at her. "And this year's first recipient is Sister Loretta Mae Dixon." Applause erupted, warm and genuine, rolling through the pews like a wave. Loretta sat frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. "Go on, sugar," Pearl called, laughing softly into the mic. "Don't make me come get you." Loretta stood, every step down the aisle feeling like walking through sunlight. Emma's small hand brushed hers, squeezing tight before letting go. At the pulpit, Pearl met her with a gentle hug. "This here's for you," she said, handing over a small wooden plaque carved with the words, Grace, Ownership, Boundaries. Pearl turned back to the congregation. This woman taught us that standing your ground doesn't mean losing your grace, that loving your family doesn't mean letting them walk on you, and that sometimes the loudest faith is the kind that just keeps showing up. Emma wiped her eyes, and even the pastor had to clear his throat. From the back of the sanctuary, a small rustle of movement caught Loretta's attention. Danielle. She was sitting alone in the last pew, stiff-backed, her face pale beneath the church lights. For a moment, Loretta wondered if Danielle might stand, might leave, might do something, but she didn't. She just sat there, still and small, as if invisible to the joy around her. Loretta didn't gloat. She just met Danielle's gaze across the rows of pews and gave a slow, steady nod, a silent offering of truth. When Pearl finished, Pastor Mayfield stepped forward again. Some women don't need titles, he said, smiling at Loretta. They already lead. The congregation rose to their feet in applause. It wasn't the thunderous kind of noise that demanded attention. It was the softer, deeper kind that meant respect. Loretta blinked hard, her throat tightening as she turned toward Emma, who was clapping through tears. The little girl's smile broke through like sunlight after rain. As the sound swelled, Loretta whispered, "Thank you, Lord," under her breath. For once, she didn't feel like part of someone else's story. She was the story, the proof that a quiet woman could still roar when she needed to. The music swelled again, the choir lifting its voices into amazing grace. Pearl slipped an arm around her shoulder as they sang, and Loretta felt her chest loosen, her breath finally coming easy. When the hymn ended, Loretta stepped back toward her pew, holding the plaque close to her chest. She didn't look back again, but she could still feel Danielle's eyes on her, a mixture of shame, envy, and something that might have been longing. The sun was low when Loretta came home, streaking the sky in ribbons of rose and gold. The plaque from church sat on the passenger seat beside her, catching the light like a quiet trophy. When she pulled into the drive, the porch glowed warm, and the curtains in the windows fluttered like they were breathing with her. She let herself in without hurry. The house greeted her the way an old friend might. No pretense, just presence. The faint scent of lemon cleaner still lingered, mixed with the softness of lavender sachets she'd tucked into drawers weeks before. Loretta set her purse on the hall table and toed off her shoes. Mahalia Jackson played low from the record player in the corner, the needle crackling gently before the music settled. "Take my hand, precious Lord," floated through the rooms like a prayer she didn't have to speak. She began her evening walk, her ritual now, through the home she'd fought to reclaim. In the living room, the photos on the wall hung straight, every frame dusted, every name in its place. Her wedding portrait caught her eye, the young woman she'd been, the man beside her smiling wide, proud of the house they'd built with more hope than money. In the dining room, sunlight spilled across the blue stoneware set gleaming neatly behind glass. 2 cups, 2 plates, 2 lives that still had space for joy. She opened a drawer and smiled at the neatly folded dish towels. Her handwriting, sharp and certain, was on every labeled envelope in the cabinet. Taxes paid, deed filed, utilities, insurance. Her name on every page, her fingerprint on every inch of the life she'd built. Loretta made her way down the hallway, touching the wall lightly as she went. The guest room, clean, simple, smelled of cedar and peace. The spare key for Emma still hung on its little hook by the door. She paused by the safe tucked neatly into the corner of her bedroom closet. The metal glinted faintly in the fading light. She turned the combination, slow and deliberate, numbers she could recite like scripture. Inside lay the deed, folded carefully, its edges soft from age but the ink still dark. She took it out, ran her thumb along the top, and whispered, still mine. For a moment she stood there, the sound of the house steady around her. Floorboards breathing, music whispering, the world outside finally quiet. Then she slipped the deed back into the safe, locked it, and pressed her palm against the cool metal. When she stepped onto the porch, the sky was already shifting toward the twilight. Fireflies blinked in the garden like tiny sparks of memory. She carried her Bible and a glass of sweet tea, the condensation wet against her fingers. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and cut grass. She sank into her favorite chair, the old wicker one that creaked like it had opinions. The quiet stretched long and kind. She flipped through her Bible absently, the thin pages whispering against her thumb. Her gaze drifted to the horizon where the sun slid behind the pines, leaving streaks of violet in its wake. The phone on the table beside her buzzed, its light blinking once. Emma calling. Loretta smiled as she lifted the receiver. "Hey there, baby girl." "Grandma," Emma said, her voice warm and small. "Can I come over for movie night?" Loretta chuckled softly. "You don't even have to ask." "I know," Emma said, "but I like hearing you say yes." "Well then, yes, always." The line went quiet for a moment. Loretta could hear faint laughter in the background, the echo of life moving forward. "I love you, Grandma," Emma said. "I love you too, sweetheart. See you soon." She hung up and leaned back, the smile lingering on her face. The last light of day washed over the porch, painting everything in shades of amber and peace. Loretta took a slow sip of her tea and watched the world exhale around her. For once, there was no fight left to win. No noise left to silence. Only calm. Only claim. The record skipped once, then found its groove again. The singer's voice rose, tender and steady. Through the storm. Through the night. Morning came soft, filtering through lace curtains and painting the walls in quiet gold. Loretta woke to the sound of the wind brushing against the house, steady and familiar, like the rhythm of a heart at peace. The house was still, whole, hers. She sat at her writing desk by the window, a small stack of stationery beside her, and reached for the brass key that had hung by the door since the day she'd changed the locks. The metal had dulled with fingerprints, the teeth smooth from years of use. She turned it over once in her hand before slipping it into a small cream-colored envelope. On the front she wrote in looping cursive, "For later. Love, Grandma." She held the pen a moment longer, tracing the L in love until the ink pooled just enough to shine. The drawer beside her held spare envelopes and a few folded linens. She cleared one of the smaller drawers completely and stuck a label on the inside of it, neat and centered. Just for you. It wasn't for her. It wasn't for Danielle or Micah. It was for the next generation, the one who watched, listened, and learned what grace looked like when it had teeth. She stood and walked through the house one last time, her hand grazing every surface as if to bless it. Door frames, tabletops, picture edges. The home answered her in silence. The good kind. By the time Pearl arrived, the sun had climbed high enough to warm the porch. She came carrying a mason jar of lemonade and a rolled-up copy of the latest church bulletin. "Well, sugar," Pearl said, setting both on the table, "you are officially famous. Again." Loretta smiled, easing into her chair. "I take it they printed my quote again?" "Front page, big and bold." Pearl unrolled the paper and handed it over. Across the top, in elegant script, it read, "Sometimes folks forget who holds the keys. God doesn't. Sister Loretta Dixon." Loretta shook her head, but her smile deepened. "They're gonna wear that out before spring." Pearl poured them each a glass of lemonade. "You don't mind being remembered for it, though." "I don't mind being remembered for standing up straight," Loretta replied, lifting her glass. and for sitting back down when the work was done. They clinked their glasses together. From inside the house came the soft creak of the screen door. Emma stepped onto the porch, barefoot and bright-eyed, her hair pulled back with a ribbon. She carried her small overnight bag and the stuffed rabbit that never left her side. "Morning, Grandma. Morning, Miss Pearl." "Morning, sunshine," Pearl said. "You look like you slept 10 hours and dreamed all the good dreams." Emma giggled. "We watched movies till I fell asleep on the couch." Loretta smiled. "And I didn't wake you." "That's what good couches are for." The girl climbed into the wicker chair beside her grandmother and nestled close. Pearl took another sip of lemonade, pretending not to notice the way Loretta's arm wrapped gently around the child's shoulders. "You keeping busy this week, sugar?" Pearl asked Emma. "I'm helping Grandma with the garden," Emma said proudly. "She said I can plant the marigolds." "That you can," Loretta said. "They're the kind that come back every year, no matter how rough the winter." Pearl smiled knowingly. "Like somebody else I know." Loretta laughed softly. "Maybe." They stayed like that for a while, the three of them on the porch, the sound of birds filling the morning, the world soft and steady around them. When Pearl finally stood to go, she patted Loretta's shoulder. "You done good, honey. You took what was broken and made it whole again." Loretta looked around, the porch, the doorway, the small figure beside her. "I just reminded it who it belonged to." Pearl's eyes glistened. "And now it remembers." After Pearl left, Loretta and Emma stayed on the porch. The little girl flipped through the church bulletin, tracing her grandmother's printed quote with her finger. "Grandma," she said quietly, "you really said that in church?" "I did." Emma grinned. "That's brave." Loretta brushed a strand of hair from her granddaughter's face. "Sometimes it's braver to say it once and live it every day after." They sat in companionable silence, the kind that doesn't ask for anything. The sunlight fell across them both, warm and honeyed. Inside, the house hummed with stillness. The deed in the safe, the blue stoneware shining in the cabinet. The drawer waiting with its label, "Just for you." Emma shifted, curling against her grandmother's side, the church bulletin slipping from her hand onto the porch floor. The faint hum of cartoons floated from the television inside, cheerful and bright. Loretta reached over, took her glass of lemonade, and looked out at her yard, the garden blooming, the wind chimes singing soft against the air. Peace had a sound after all. It wasn't silence. It was belonging. Loretta leaned her head back, her lips curving in a quiet smile. "DIL branded me extended family at church," she murmured, her voice barely above the rustle of the wind, "so I gave her 30 days to pack." And for the first time, those words didn't taste like revenge. They tasted like restoration,